Welcome to the Dark Loops Productions discussion of the acclaimed Netflix series Squid Game. I'm your host, Dr. Scott Jordan, aka Zombie Scotty, cognitive psychologist, philosopher at Illinois State University. And tonight we discuss round 2, Dalgona or Popki. There were 2 names in the title. Contestants, please tell us your name, as well as a little something about who you are, and we'll start with Joey.
My name is Joey Bai. I'm a PhD student at Brown University, and I study cognitive science.
Fantastic. How about you, Suejung?
Hi, my name is Suejung Han. I'm an associate professor in counseling psychology at Illinois State University.
Fantastic. And how about you, Shengtian?
Hi, everybody. This is Shengtian Wu. I'm an assistant professor at Illinois State University, teaching school psych classes.
Excellent. So before we begin tonight's discussion, I got a couple of things I want to share with you guys. First, I want to show you this image. So there's a huge Comic-Con that takes place in Chicago every year called C2E2. And I went for a bit this year and saw these 2 guys basically cosplaying a scene from Squid Game, the Doxy game. And let me show you just a little bit more.
Like the suit.
That's wrong.
I just couldn't help myself. So they were actually playing. I was wondering, who knows what they're doing, but you can see they have a crowd around them. And I just thought it was totally cool. It's one of the reasons I love to go to these cons, because it really is a place that celebrates diversity, celebrates difference, and lets people play those roles for a bit if they want. We also have a little bit of viewer mail in response to our first episode. So
Exciting.
when I post the episode, I said, did you watch Squid Game? Here's a multicultural discussion of the show, one game at a time. And a gentleman by the name of Cadu Olivier from Brazil responded, and he said, yes, I did. Despite all the controversy about violence as a cultural display, the movie shows us a lot. Different from the US hero, big guy, handsome, fighting the bad guy for the most beautiful girl, or the European hero, rich owner of a hotel or growing grapes to produce wine. This time we saw the anti-hero, big heart, no job, no wife, living with mother. He won because he selected the old and weak man, but very wise. That invites us to think about our own choice algorithm. So I wonder if you guys had any responses to Cadu, I'm not sure.
I think that, he was spot on. And my understanding as a non-American of the American rhetoric is the redemptive self. So, you have you have this hero that has all the great potentials for being handsome and great and nice, but somehow for some reasons you struggle, but then eventually you redeem yourself and presenting your handsome, nice self who accomplished a lot by saving the world, or and the hero in Squid Game was very different.
Yeah, I've actually, dare I say, given talks at cons about Eastern heroes versus Western heroes. The character I talked about in particular was Edward Elric from Full Metal Alchemist. Because basically what you see in a lot of Western heroism is as you said, the celebration of the successful self, the successful individual. And even though those individuals in American rhetoric it's implied that they're heroes because they achieve something, and sometimes it's got this social element where they saved other people, the emphasis is still not holistic. It's still heavily on the individual identity, where in like Full Metal Alchemist, basically the hero, through his actions over the course of the event, ends up creating this external group of diverse folk that come together and save the day collectively, as opposed to him, saving the day by himself. And on the one hand, one could say I'm splitting hairs. There really is no difference. On the other hand, I do think there is just I've experienced more a relational approach to identity in the Eastern stories than I do in the ones that we might call Western. So I think you're right. I think he hit something on the head here. We can talk about that theme as we go through this, because you guys can tell me I'm just full of it and there is no difference and I'm just splitting hairs. But
That got me.
Go ahead.
That got me thinking, because is it because here in the U.S. it's mostly the case that the one hero saved the day, or is it because people here think that's a more ideal case, so it's more portrayed in the movie or TVs?
Well, please, everybody else to chime in. Again, my experience is there's, if we were to look at identity as a relational versus individualistic continuum, I have found the United States to probably be on the extreme end of individualism, at least in the cultures I've been in. And so it's, given that we're all inherently relational, there's no way we can pretend we're not. We spend a lot of time oxymoronically pretending that we did everything by ourselves and such in the United States. So it doesn't completely pull itself away from its relational nature, but there is, I would say, just to put it bluntly, there's such an overemphasis on individualism. It's precisely what allows capitalism to run wild, right? Because then everybody comes to believe that they're responsible for all outcomes in their life, right? And which, if you can get a group of people to believe that, then they're not going to have a contextual relational view on why they're in the space they're in. They're just going to blame it on others or blame it on themselves, but they're not going to look at it as much in a systems perspective. And so that's just my experience. You guys may have completely different experiences, or
it's not necessarily an experience, but my very kind of rough understanding is that, like you said, the self is defined as your personal attributes and characteristics and your own accomplishment in the individualistic cultural context like US, but in the traditional Eastern cultural context, the self is defined in relation to others. So you are defined, for example, I'm defined not as Suejung, I'm defined as one of your colleagues, one of the panels that is doing this with you. Right. And if I'm with my family, I'm defined again not as Suejung, but I'm defined as a mom or as a wife and things like this. So, and then your self-worth or your value is determined how well you play the role in that relational context. So that kind of makes sense to me when you said Eastern versus Western heroes. That made me think, okay, that makes sense, because Ijong 465, the main character, he was a good fellow citizen, good person to be with in that context, good team member. So I think in that sense, his worth was well pronounced by him being a good collaborator, not accomplishing something himself. And the smarty pants, the brainy guy, he was portrayed as selfish. He was definitely not a hero, although he contributed a lot to winning games and things like that, because he was not a good collaborator. He's not fulfilling the role in the relational context, as well as 465.
Yeah, what I really like, the things you're pointing out really shine in these two episodes we watched, because when they all come back and they're in the room together, I think he's the one who says we should make a team. And then I think he's the one who's reaching out to everyone, asking how they're doing, bringing their stories to the table. And then I don't think it's an accident how that final scene between him and his childhood friend who went off to school, how that ends, because there's a certain value that his friend recognizes. He feels disappointed in himself that maybe he didn't express it as well as his friends. So yeah, Joey or Shengtian, please. I'm sorry, go ahead.
My view is a little different, because I'm I'm almost surprised that people compare this, show to like hero movies or hero shows, because my thought was entirely was not even in that in that route. I was more about the characters and the actions and the different games and stuff are, showing. I feel like the producer or the director was trying to utilizing those characters to describe this current society and people's like true nature and something like that. And I wasn't even thinking about the hero movie, that part. And that was making me reflecting like, what's going on with me then? Like when people that with like hero movie, compare that with a hero movie, I wasn't even going to that route. So that was my little reflection when you were talking about that one.
Well, I think like that might not be trivial, a difference. In other words, I was raised in the United States, and I'm not at all here to say I'm anti-individualistic. I mean, I'll be quite honest with you. American individualism provided me an opportunity to go in ways my relational world didn't afford, right? And I was able to take risks and able to make choices that I don't know would have been as easy to make if I had been in a more relational. And when we say relational versus individualistic, it's not just a cognitive description, it's a felt way you live, right? And so I was raised here, and I'm a huge Marvel fan, right? And they have superheroes and such, and so that frame comes to the fore when I'm watching these kind of movies. Not necessarily saying I'm looking for the hero, but there's a frame I live in, and it definitely influences how I experience. And that's what I kind of love about this conversation, right? Is the same film gives us the opportunity to all sort of express our different frames and
I think it's a really good point, Shengtian, that I didn't think about that as a hero movie either. But then when I heard Kadu's comment, that made me kind of think, then 465 could be conceptualized as a hero. And then when I heard you said, Scott, you said the comparison between Eastern and Western heroes, that also made sense to me. And that reminded me of some of the topics that we talk about in classes and things like that. And then Shengtian's comment that also make me think or wonder, maybe we are so used to using or imposing this Western perspective in conceptualizing movie characters, either hero or not, or just focusing on individual characters rather than the whole movie as a scheme. So that.
No, I think you're absolutely onto something. I think quite often there are movies where I would argue that are critiques of this view. So for example, I would argue Breaking Bad is a 5-season critique of American individualism, right? There's a new series, Ozark, that I would argue is a critique of that sort of American individualism. Yes, for me, what it comes down to is the different cultural frameworks we use to experience what's different between people, right? Because we in a relational system, it's a more relational categorical scheme, and in an individual system, it's less relational. I'll stop there because I could talk about this all day about but having not been raised in a relational system, all I can do is speak about it cognitively, right? I really can't do more than that. Go ahead.
I'm going to add one more thing to this conversation.
Go ahead.
Move on to the Squid Game content. And I recall we had a very quick conversation about how collectivist the US actually is in a sense. And it is very kind of relative. And I can, with students, talk about so many examples of collectivistic characteristics in the US context. And also there are so many so-called traditionally individualistic characteristics in the Eastern cultural context as well.
Yes.
Then I just recently found an article that contrasts different types of collectivism between China, Japan, and Korea. And I mean, from the Western perspective, the collective, they are East Asian countries.
Right,
So
right,
they're
right.
often viewed as the same, exact cultural context, but they are very different. And I didn't have a chance to read the article yet.
No, I'd
but
love it if you sent us all a copy of that
yeah,
paper.
it
That'd be
was
great.
so interesting that, I just read the abstract. I cannot remember the details, but when I read them, it made a perfect sense. And yeah, so again, we sometimes just use this binary, civilization, Eastern, Western, individualistic, and collectivistic. And I recall, Scott, you mentioned different types of collectivism, and US is characterized by this collectivism and things like that. It seems that there are a lot more nuanced discussions out there that I'm just really curious to learn more about.
Well, we've already gone knee deep into this conversation. We might as well just go all the way, right? In my work, the past decade or two, I've been trying to move to a model of the self as embodied others. In other words, the scientific data are really pretty clear. It's very easy for us to resonate to other people. Infants are helpless unless you make them scared. Then, of course, they deny you the opportunity to resonate with them because they just look away or whatever. But inhibition seems to be what we end up learning more than resonance. Resonance seems to be how we come to the world. And so we live in self-other tension our entire lives. And different cultures emphasize different aspects of that tension. And as a lover and a critic of American culture, I have said before, and I'll say again, I do believe that our emphasis on individualism affords us the sociopathic sort of capitalism we see, right? Because if you can get a system of people to believe that everything in their life is a consequence of their choices, then there's no need for them to look into a system. There's no need for them to look into a system. Therefore, they don't. And now I'm not saying that means that's bad and other systems are good. All these systems have their own tensions. And I don't know, I somehow feel that a more common understanding that we all live in that tension could be useful, but who knows? I don't know if it would benefit people from knowing that. But
I remember you one time I went to your office, Scott, and you were so excited and then telling me about a paper about Sunbird, how Sunbird discriminate distinguish its own sound voice from the caregiver's sound.
Yeah, so the baby bird's brain resonates to daddy's song. And it basically mirrors that song. But what happens in the bird's brain is eventually its own brain starts to inhibit the dad's influence. And what this does is allow it not to sing when dad does. It allows it not to flap its wings when dad does. It's a necessary condition of being a member of a group, because you can't just do what everyone else is doing. Even if you're a flock of birds, you have to coordinate what you're doing in relation to what they're doing. So that, like when we talked about red light, green light last time, and it's a game of inhibition, all these other people are running, so you're primed to run, and now stop you. Inhibition is the thing we have to do to ourselves. And to see that completely out of any cultural understanding, this bird's brain was partitioning itself from its father's. I thought that's the coolest scientific finding for me of the last 20 years, because it shows that the self is a byproduct of inhibiting the other, in resonating to some things they do and preventing ourselves from resonating to others. And finding yourself in a sea of others, that's just kind of, the way I came to think about it. And I'm glad to say you saw me and I was excited. I just, because I use that data in talks all the time.
And I remember that detail very vividly. And afterwards, I also thought about that in terms of other things I experienced. Sometimes this is my personal experience. Like when I have certain requirement on myself, um, if I see other people like my friends, they violated that rule. That requirement was set for myself, but when my friend violated that, I got angry too. Realistically, I don't need to be angry, but somehow I just consider like maybe it's the blurry boundary between myself and others that makes me think, oh, this behavior is bad, instead of like me doing this behavior is bad.
Joy, I love that example because as you get older, you learn it just rolls off your back. But when you're younger and you're developing those constraints for yourself, it's like two young kids in the back seat where the older one's trying to talk, and the younger one just says exactly what they said right behind them, and the older one can't talk anymore because the younger one's interfering with their planning. You're trying to organize your life in a constrained way, and people are running around not doing that. It just violates all that stuff for you. All I can say is you live through it. You organize yourself around it, and later on in life, you just don't hang around with those people anymore. You just organize your world. But you also, because if we are resonating to each other, then seeing what they're doing puts you in the planning state to do what they're doing. And then then there's this negative, oh, I don't do that. And it is frustrating, not unlike watching people assault the U.S. Capitol on January 6, 2021. Just terrifying, just because it was so violent, but also because you can't do that. I mean, that's exactly the response. You can't do that. What does that mean? Yeah. No, I love that insight. Well, Kadu's going to be excited we got this much mileage out of his. But I think it's just also what we're about talking here, right, is in the end, how do we think about what people are? How do we think about what they value and why they do what they do? And do cultures have impacts on and how that plays out? So now we're going to discuss Dalgona or Popki. The way we do this is favorite scene, favorite line, favorite character, favorite theme, whatever you want to discuss. The floor is open.
So is Suejung the only person who had Dalgona before? Because I never had.
Oh,
Would you
yeah,
like
I
to do
had Dalgona a lot as a kid. And I actually went back to Korea over the summer. And my brother-in-law, he brought the Dalgona kit, because Squid Game was so popular, and we still have Dalgona vendors, I guess, on streets like in big cities like Seoul, as a kind of nostalgic snack or something. But because Squid Game became so popular now, they sell Dalgona kits. So you have these tools and ingredients in a small packet, and you can just make it easy. So he brought that to our family gathering, and then we did the Dalgona. He was not that good, like a professional mentors, but we had a lot of fun eating kind of burnt Dalgona or Paragona that was just messed up and a lot of sugar high, but it was kind of fun. But that reminded me and other my husband and my brothers and sisters-in-law of what we used to enjoy as a child. It was a cheap sugary snack.
If you go to really nice place for Dalgona, is it taste amazing? Is it really good? Or
you really can't go wrong with sugar. It's really it's sugary, and it's if you do it well, optimally sweet. It's not too sweet. If I'm offending someone, sorry, but when I first experienced American sweets, when I first came to the United States, they were too sweet for me, too sugary. But Dalgona, although it's just complete maybe 80% sugar, it's still optimally sweet,
Mm.
not too overpowering. And if you do it wrong, if you put baking soda too much, it becomes a little bitter. And if you burn it, it becomes bitter. But if you really do it well, it's like, ooh, yeah, they,
Very good.
yeah.
Really now, gosh.
So
You carve the shape out of it, or you just eat it as it is when they come out of the mold.
So in the Squid Game, you saw the already made Dalgona, um, Paragona that you can kind of take the peripheries off of the main shapes. And actually you put sugar, baking soda, a little bit of baking soda, and then you put that pot over heat, and then you start stirring, rigorously, and it becomes kind of gooey, and it becomes slightly brown. And when it starts rising, you put the kind of boiling sugary dough onto a cold plate, and then you press it down to make it flat. And then you take it off. And when it's still not fully hardened, you press the shape maker onto it, just with an optimal pressure, so that you don't cut it off totally, but you still leave the shape, clear. And so when I was young, we used to kind of beg the vendors to press it harder, harder when they were making it. Yeah, so that's how you make it.
So were there any scenes that you guys watched when you were watching it again? Were there any scenes in these episodes that you experienced differently? Or are there any particular scenes that you want to sort of talk about?
For me, I was more thinking about all the scenes before the game. They vividly, express, depict how hard the life is for each person, and they describe each first person from different backgrounds experience very different things. Examples would be that North Korean girl is experiencing separation from the younger brother, and then more money from that guy, and has to be violent sometimes to be survived. And there's another guy, the survival skills looks like for that smart, allegedly smart guy is cheating other people, and
Yep.
another guy, survival skills, pretend to be strong and fight each other, and then take away money from other people, being violent is his techniques. And it's all that sadness coming out of different layers of the society, including that it's Indian guy, right? Or it's Pakistani guy.
Pakistan.
Yeah.
It's from Korean people to other people who came to Korea. They all experienced, a lot of different challenges. It just reminds me of, I think a lot of Korean people might, when they watch the movie, they probably think about that term. They keep saying that term. Some people agree, some people disagree. They call it Hell Korea. So a lot of people feel a lot of pressure living in South Korea, and they believe our country is a hell, So they keep saying those words, Hell Korea. When I was looking at that, that image just came to my mind. I was thinking the people who consider Hell Korea as the hell, is probably experienced something like that, So that just reflects me about those difficult lives in South Korea.
I really like what you did, referring to those different struggles in those different areas of society as survival skills, right? Because it relates directly to the idea of going back to the game. It's like, I can't survive this. This is what I got to do to survive this. So I might as well go there. And I feel I could survive easier or better there, or more better chance of surviving if I go there than if I do this. I hadn't, you're right. They show us every one of them and what's at stake and what they've lost and what they're trying to gain. You're exactly right.
Legally inappropriate, illegal, something like that. But in their minds, it's a skills, even though that can hurt other people, so that's in some ways fascinating, in some ways really, really sad, so.
What I love about these kind of movies where you have characters that are doing what it's called maybe breaking the law, right? Doing things that we would categorize as illegal. Often there's a tendency to call them anti-heroes, right? I like to think of them as what I call heroes of the gradient. In other words, if you look at culture as a gradient of work, a gradient of struggles. So the guy who went to school, no one's got a knife at his throat, right? No one, he's eating. He gives money to the guy so we can get the bus. But nonetheless, he feels like he's surviving at a sort of financial level, right? So you have all these people struggling at these different levels of cultural gradient, and people, the crowds I run in, they like to classify them as anti-heroes. I just like to refer to them as what I call heroes of the gradient. They're just struggling to sustain themselves in certain embodied ways of living that aren't working for them right now, and there's a lot to lose, and we get to see them struggle to figure out how to stay alive, how to respect themselves, whatever the outcome is that they're working toward.
Now, when I rewatch it, I noticed some details I didn't see the first time. Like when they voted for quitting the game, the people who voted quitting are those who kind of they still have a chance in life compared to the other. Like the main character voted to leave because he has mom to take care of, and there's still something outside like that he can live up for. And the Pakistani guy, he has wife and kids, so he voted to leave. And the 218, like the smart guy, he want to stay because there's no way he can repay that debt, he has. And who else? And the North Korean girl, also she don't have anyone to rely on in the country, so she voted to stay in the game.
And what I loved about when she voted to stay, it was just quick, decisive, boom, thank you very much, get back in line. Yeah. More so than anybody else, there was no latency at all. Bam. That was all written, to play out that way. I thought that was what I love about that is they're showing us their cognitive processes in the way that their bodies move, yes or no, to the X's and the O's. It just, and as someone who does left-right reaction.
Yeah, exactly. Millisecond level.
Millisecond. And, there's a trend in that research. There's been a trend for a decade to have people indicate yes or no by using a mouse. So you move a mouse to hit X or use a mouse to hit no, and you can actually see response conflicts when people start to go one way and then go the other, right? So sort of embodying the cognitive process. And they definitely did that. In this. The very first guy just stood there forever, and they had his hand right between both buttons, right? And he just sat there. It was just, and of course, we're just filling in his mind space for him, right? It's just fantastic.
Video emotion.
And it's crazy that they clearly know the Squid Game organizer. They clearly know they're gonna come back, and they have that experience for years and years. So they act like they're hesitating, but they set up everything's in a way that's so organized so that they can contact them when they're in a desperate situations, including the guy who was about to suicide, including the guy who's being sad and something else. So that's another crazy thing. So I'm like, is that another picture of the society where people are being watched all the time and then being attacked in their most vulnerable timing? That was another reflection when I was looking at that. It was so crazy.
I ended up paying more attention to the clarity of the game this time, because the advantage of clarity is it implies certainty, and when you can come across as certain, you can be persuasive. And this is the one where they went into the whole discussion of being fair, right? And I ended up looking at the gentlemen or the people in the red outfits differently this time, because when they're when, I got to remember, they're playing the Squid Game, and oh yes, and then one guy captures one of the men in red, and he forces him to take off his helmet. He takes off his helmet, and the guy comes up and shoots him, and he says, "The minute they see your face, we're done." Now, in the context of, you know, the moment to moment interactions, oh, okay, that's another weird Squid Game rule. But if you think about it, what it said to me was, corporations, we want to remain faceless, right? The advantage of, the financial advantage of a corporation is that they can be sued, but a person doesn't get sued. A corporation gets sued, and they pay people lots of money to be the spokesperson for the corporation. So when the guy said, if they see our face, we're done, what that said to me was, we cannot humanize the Squid Game. All the humanity has to be them. We have to be just the simple cold hard rules, which means we just have to be the system, and we have to get them to believe it. And once they believe it, we win. And as you said, they knew they were coming back, right? Yeah, look at all that money up there. You can leave if you want. So I looked at those guys in red just differently this time. And what I love about shows like this is I'll go back and watch that scene again at some point and get more out of it, right? They're spending so much time acting, writing, and creating these sets that there's quite a bit there to pick up on later.
Well, related to that, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say that related to that scene, what I really remember clearly about that scene is when the man killed himself after
Yes.
seeing the face of the red, crew.
Yeah.
And I mean, from this episode, when I was hearing from you guys, some of the keywords that I was reminded of were despair and hopelessness. And so they were, those who came back to the game, they were having only one hope left. When they decided to vote for quitting the game, they were still hoping things might be better outside than staying in the game. But then when they went outside, they realized, again, which is not surprising, they realized that harsh reality, that it is more like hell, in reality than in the Squid Game setting. So they came back with one hope left, but then, and so it's not directly related to that scene, but when I saw his face, after he saw the face of the red crew, I felt like it was a pure despair.
Yeah.
And I don't know how I could really articulate the feeling that I saw there, but it was a just total loss of any hope.
He said at the moment.
Go ahead.
Like, yeah, he said at the moment, like, why do you, like, such a young guy is in these shoots, and then he just killed himself. And I probably felt like in his mind, and I'm assuming, I have no idea, and I'm assuming he's like, I'm this old, I've been experiencing this a lot, and I'm hopeless. But look at you, even people like you are being in this kind of condition. So probably there's no hope, and I'm done. Like that was my thought when I look at that, though.
I think all these thoughts come together, right? Because it was the first human face other than the contestants that he'd seen in that space. And I think you're right, Suejung, that did him in. He was able to believe it wasn't it's not that he went around convincing himself these weren't humans. It's just he had never resonated to them. He had never seen their faces. And so he was able to just experience all the local humanity of the other contestants. And suddenly, oh my God, this is all people? It's over. right? If this is what we're doing to each other, yeah, I think the despair is definitely on target. God, what I love about this is just one scene, right? It has all that depth.
Yeah.
They definitely work to produce.
Yeah, it may be a loss of hope for the entire humanity. Like you said, it may be, I'm kind of maybe speculating a little too much, but like
That's why we're here. Don't worry about it at all.
Like Xinqian, as you said, maybe I don't know if I'm just, writing up a life story about that guy. Maybe he was searching for, he was chasing after this money for the family outside, maybe for better life for his children. And maybe, I don't know. So there is no hope for even the younger generations who he assumed may have more resources, more abilities or potentials or things like
Well,
that.
Again, there are plenty of movies where a villain, what we would call a villain, whatever, or someone who's gone down a certain path, sees someone younger, reminds them of their own families, and they, at the same time, if you have a more relational identity to begin with, then I think maybe the identity structure is a little more culturally rooted, and that one individual can stand for a whole lot of relationality that you just doesn't make any sense. So I really, I hate to say things like I like that scene. No, I don't like watching people get shot. No, I don't like watching people shoot themselves. I put my hands up often, to be honest.
I got you.
But there's a certain honesty about the human condition that they're showing us, right? And that's why I'm there. Absolutely.
He knows he's gonna die.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I was just gonna say that the young face, maybe like you said, Scott, reminded him of his family or some others that made him so vulnerable, and realize what he was doing and how he was losing his humanity and dignity by participating in violence and just trying to win over others' death. And the realization about what I'm doing as a human, like a total psychopath. So I think kind of caused us maybe loss of sense of hope.
Totally.
Another speculation is that probably the guy has some regret in his younger life, and then when he sees that guy is also young and already in a organizer role in this Squid Game, it's probably another shock for him, because he knows he's gonna die. He absolutely knows he's gonna die, and his action to kill himself was faster than being killed, which I think, not again, it's telling the level of despair at the moment. So
after the discussion, suddenly feel it's very familiar to me, because lots of I know many stories around me. When I'm back in China, parents would tell their kids like, "I'm doing this to earn the money, so that in the future you don't have to do this."
right.
Yeah.
It's like maybe they're like sacrificing something, either a moral value or something else to make the money. But their hope is they sacrifice themselves so that their kids can have the money, so they don't have to do this. But when you see like this young person is also doing the same thing, and the contestant probably think, "Oh, I'm doing this for nothing."
There's the two things. One is one of my favorite sci-fi movies is Children of Men. And basically in the story, humans have lost the ability to reproduce. And so it's been 20 years since the last human was born, and the world starts to fall into disarray. And there's a scene, the show basically starts about a woman who is pregnant, and one of the main male characters of this show has to get her to a secret lab so she can be taken care of. And there's a great scene where they're in the midst of all this fighting going on, and he's trying to walk her upstairs in this building to keep her safe, and the baby starts crying, and everybody just shuts up. And then they start walking out of the building and everybody gets out of their way. And you can see this path of people opening up. The crying baby walks through. And then as soon as the baby's crying voice is a certain distance away,
Boom.
he closes and they start fighting again, right? And just that idea of how much of our own identity we invest into children, invest into youth. And so, yeah, all of it. All the things we've said, you know, it doesn't matter, you know, if it all went through that character's mind. The writers definitely created this Rorschach thing for us to look at, you know, and have all of these different conversations and reactions to, which for me means it's good art, right? And yeah, absolutely. Any other characters or scenes that jumped out at you?
Just small thoughts like, you know, how fragile our financial stability is. Like, you know, if you just make a very small mistake in cutting out the periphery of Dalgona, you just die. And like, you know, and then just little things like there are still this lady using a lighter to heat up the needle, and then she shares that with the villain. I mean, yes. I think he's probably the pure red. I don't know about his background, but maybe he was the only, to my impression, the only pure red psychopathic person. But you know, shares that with him, you know, to somehow to be included in the gang.
Yeah, it's interesting that she tries to ally herself with him, right? And she doesn't try to ally herself with, you know, the main character or the, you know, the character that went to school. She sees something about this type of guy that she thinks will work to her advantage, you know, throughout the game. I really loved the different ways that they tried to solve the problem. So the Pakistani guy had a circle, if I'm not mistaken, and he just slowly but surely broke every little piece off until he got to the circle. It worked, but when the guy started licking the back of it, that's just brilliant. The stuff was made to be eaten, right? So the very thing it was made to be used for saved his life. And just, you know, lick it from the back, man. And then everybody looks at him and then everybody else said, no.
Oh, that's a very good point.
I'd hate to say it was a little bit of comedy, but there was a little comedy going on there while people were being shot in the background.
Again, I think that's like another reflection of how they have been doing in the society, was just translating into that small context where people think about how can I live a better life? And some people look for the stronger person. And some people have more simple mind, like the main character. He's like, oh, I loved umbrella. I know I need an umbrella. So like I love
exactly.
a lot. Like, okay, I'm screwed. And then he's like trying so hard. And that simple mind sometimes leads to that, you know, creativity. Just all of a sudden was able to look at upward and look at the light, and then like I can leak. And then he's the only guy was able to solve the hardest question, which let other people look at that and then solve the problems together. I'm like, wow, you know.
No, his sweat dropped on the thing, and then he saw that, and then water.
Isn't that beautiful?
Yeah.
It wasn't cognitive. In other words, it emerged out of his lived work. And then he taps into something that his lived work put in the world. And I mean, there was cognitive in a sense of doing the insight to recognize that's what he had to do the rest. But he didn't hold it in front of him and think, how do I solve this problem? Right? He just worked the problem. And the working of the problem created a solution he hadn't anticipated, which is live life, by the way. I mean, you know, vast majority of my solutions are not what I intended at all. And even his school friend did exactly what you just said, Shengtian. He survived the game by doing the type of tactics he does out in the world, by having a memory. Oh, he had a memory of, he saw the shapes, and then he had a memory that led him to think that they were going to do something like they were doing. I don't remember what his memory was. And he says, well, I'm going to take this, or I'm going to take the triangle, right? And then he sees, his friend say, well, I'm going to take the umbrella. And you can see him like, oh man, don't take the umbrella. Yeah. But he lets him go, right? He just lets him go because he's manipulating him, right? He's manipulating everybody else. And he doesn't even have what it takes on that manipulating team to save his friend. He just says, okay, dude, whatever. And he's relieved to see that he survived at the end. But you're right. I hadn't noticed that they actually survive that game the same way they survive out in the world. So yeah, that's fantastic.
The part is that, which still happens at the later games, but he has that a little combat between his, good mind versus evil mind. And I think, again, it's reflection of how he survives in the real world. The evil mind kind of, win the game, and then he just let other people to go, and then he goes to that more like, playing the winning game, So that was interesting.
No, there's a psychology there, right? There's definitely a psychology, because the tragic events that result, the tragic effects of your actions don't exist in your world. They exist in someone else's world. So you swindle someone out of money, you embezzle money, you take that money and you put it in your immediate world, and it's someone else in another space who suffers the consequences of not having that money. So by separating the effects of your actions into their world and yours, you get to be a good guy in this world. And then, but the minute you remember in the middle of the night, oh crap, right? All those people that are hurt, or you see it on the news, that's when your dissonance begins. But I think that's not a bad way to think about systemic privilege, right? In other words, people that are living a life of systemic privilege don't have the bad consequences of privilege in their lived life. It's in the lived lives of other people, and their lived lives are privileged, right? And they just don't see the negative consequences. And I wonder, you mentioned he has his good mind and his bad mind. One of the things about privilege culture is the consequences tend to be so remote that you never see them, and you never really have to think about them. So you don't ever end up in a good mind, bad mind spot, unless you go to an EDI training class, or, unless you go somewhere where somebody puts the effects of your lived life on other people into your world. And, we see a lot of that going on right now, by the way. And there's also a psychology of how people react to that. Right? A whole lot of denial, a whole lot of, oh, but wait, I suffer too, man. What about my pain? And a whole lot of psychological stuff going on.
That's true.
Have you watched The Good Place?
Huh?
The Good Place?
I watched some of The Good Place. I didn't watch the whole thing.
It's an interesting show. Part of it is about how hard it is to be a nice person in the world, because many choices we make is totally harmless when we are thinking about making this decision, but actually the effect of it is just more or less involves some evil behind.
Yeah, Suejung, you were going to say something.
Yeah. Oh gosh.
I was talking about the effects of your live.
Mind. Okay, two thoughts. Now I remember. So one was that, like you said, he hesitated. So he demonstrated a little bit of conscience. So he's not a totally purely red psychopath. And another thought that I had was that he was privileged in the sense that he was born with maybe high intelligence. He didn't do anything great. I don't know, he might have done something great in the previous life, who knows? But that was his privilege. He was born in a poor family, but maybe with hardworking parents or the mom. But his privilege was the high intelligence, and he used that resource to succeed in the system.
Yeah.
But relying on that resource also failed him in the system. So that's how he, failed and lost a lot of money from investment and things like that. And he repeated the exact same pattern within the game too. You know, he was successful all the way till the end by using his old strategies, like Shengtian said, but then he ended up, you know, failing, like he failed in the system outside. So that kind of made me wonder, which is related to what you you guys said, is that we particularly the Western culture and US culture and this academic culture really emphasizes reliance on cognitive conceptualization, appraisal, logical reasoning as a main functional problem solving. But then, like you guys said, he, 465, he just relied on his gut, his own somehow embedded, intuitive, creative problem-solving capacity. I mean, I understand that as a concept. You know, that's the main idea of the humanistic psychology, as opposed to behaviorism and other biological perspectives of human mind. So when I read their texts, they make sense as a concept, but I'm so used to valuing cognitive problem solving. I mean, that does not fully resonate with me at the gut level, you know? So, you know, if you want to solve a problem, like, you know, submitting your sabbatical proposal and things like that, you need to plan things out. And you need to rely on your cognitive problem solving. I just cannot imagine how I could rely on my gut, you know, to solve that problem, that life problem. But then the humanistic and existential psychologists, they argue many of these modern problems come from this overvaluation and overvaluation of cognitive problem solving and devaluation of our own creative problem solving capacity that we are just born with. And we just learn to dismiss that growing up, you know, in this US educational system. And I think I'm the product of that type of educational system. So I just, but in the end, 465 succeeded by just relying on his gut and his true self.
Yeah. No, there's a lot of stuff. I think that I'm going to say experimental psychology. I'm not going to try to speak for counseling, but experimental psychology definitely overcognizes what I call overcognizes the beast, right? We have a whole world of lived life. And more philosophically, I would argue that a lot of the logic we use, we're using not because it's logical, but because we want to, right? And what means it comes from passion first, it comes from human desire first, and then we use it to get what we want logically. But the idea that anything is set up logically a priori is kind of the Enlightenment myth that, as you said, particularly in experimental psychology, the whole embodiment movement is kind of a rejection of the idea of overcognizing. And for me, politically, it matters because we make a lot of political arguments on the left that we see, oh, I'm so smart, man. I logically got this figured out. And the problem is, it's not about the logic. It's about what do you want? And then use logic to persuade people to want it. But the idea that you can use your logic and tell someone they're wrong, and now they're going to do what you want is part of the problem. It all begins with desire, is my point. And that's not nihilistic. That's not cynical. That's, for me, an honest expression of the human condition. I want to be logical and I want to use logic, as you said, to make sure I get that application in on time. But that doesn't mean that that's what it is. Logic is a tool. It's not the, Boy, we're having a lot of great conversations on these things tonight. Any other characters or events or things that you guys wanted to talk about?
A different approach, I guess. When I saw groups of people. They're trying to they're selecting the shape at the beginning.
Mm.
Like people line up, and maybe they have their own reason why they choose the shape. Our main character want to keep his umbrella, so he chose umbrella without knowing like this decision might have a great impact on their life. And after this choice, they're playing the game at a different difficulty level. Like he's playing the hard mode,
Yeah.
and people choosing a triangle is the easy mode.
Yeah.
And sometimes the difference of those choices is very hard to using hard work to compensate the difference. It's like I'm not sure the director is trying to reflect that, but it's just I saw the similarity and it struck me so strongly because like some people they got an advantage just by luck, like they have no idea why they chose triangle. Like, but once the choice is made, you can look at everyone is trying to work very hard, but the result come out different. And people might feel, oh, this is so unfair. Like, I just have bad luck. But in life, it happens every day. It's just so scarily familiar.
And you're right. Everybody was working, right?
And some people have an advantage, like lighter.
Yeah.
And going back to our earlier discussion, Joey, what you just said reminds me again that you think that you're making a logical choice.
Yeah.
Actually, it's not possible for you to be making a fully informed, fully logical choice because there are so many unknowns.
And we use that as our tools to try, but unfortunately, it's much decided by the luck. So.
Or luck, or things that dimensions that our thought structures just didn't contemplate. And I think that's a common theme in these episodes, because like the gentleman who killed himself, he never even contemplated that there were humans behind those masks in a way that would have really influenced his behavior in the moment. Of course, in the moment when he knows he's going to die, he says, "Let me see your face." And then it's like, damn, this is over, right? So everybody's dealing with dementia. So I wonder if to some extent there's a sort of take-home message there that we live in this hyper complex dimensionality of a reality, and our ideas, I call it the curse of being, right? We necessarily have to create thoughts. We necessarily have to organize ourselves to do things, but that's not about being right, because we can never know if they're right in any sort of, correspondence driven way. So that's why I always go back to it. It all begins with desire. What do we want? And then what systems are we going to use to try to make it happen? I did notice that one of the things I loved about this episode is once the college graduate had decided to go to the triangle space, the girl from North Korea followed him, right? She was just waiting for him to decide. And as soon as he decided, she followed him. And that may have something to do with the way she plays life. I hadn't thought it through or anything, but she obviously has a keen sense for who's gonna have an advantage in a situation. And
yeah, like Shengtian said, survival skill.
Yeah.
It was interesting. She sneaked into that whatever working room to see what they're doing, but she has no idea because she's not from South Korea. So she had to ask that, whatever college guy, whatever, and then he didn't fully express it, but she was able to see through something is going on and believe that the guy knows that. And then like, you're the guy, and
that's how it happened. She said, yeah, she told him what she saw. And then he had put that all together in a memory. I don't know if they showed us the cakes in the memory. I don't remember, but for someone that led him, you're right, to say, I'm taking that triangle. And she said, okay, I got what I needed out of that one. I'm going to drop all my info on him now.
In that that again reminds me of the harsh reality that you have to have something to offer on the table, to survive. I mean, you have to prove that you're useful somehow. You're not just included just because you are you
and that speaks to our main character, right, who invites the old man to be on his team, right? And there's kind of of course there's a sick twistedness to how all that plays out in the end of the series, because it definitely doesn't play out Willy Wonka Chocolate Factory, right? It's not like, oh, Charlie, you were the best one. It's like the exact opposite of Willy Wonka, right? It's you got all that money, but oh my God, oh my goodness. Yeah. That about wraps it up for tonight's episode. Thanks so much to the audience for tuning in. Dark Loop Squid Game contestants, if you're so inclined, please tell the audience where they can find you on social media, and we'll start with Joey.
You can find me on Facebook by searching for Joey Bai. So my name appear here.
Fantastic. How about you, Shengtian?
You can find me on Twitter. Type @Shengtian Wu. There you can find me.
Fantastic. And Suejung?
So in the first episode, I said that I'm trying to minimize my online presence, but I'm on sabbatical. So I have some leftover energy and time to be back.
She's up for it now.
So you can find me on Facebook. You can just search my name, Suejung Han, and you'll find my account.
Fantastic. You can find me on Twitter at @dark_loops. You can find all episodes of the Dark Loops Squid Game at the Dark Loops Productions channel on YouTube. If you'd like to leave feedback about this podcast, please leave it on this YouTube page or send a message to darkloopsproductions@gmail.com, and we'll be sure to read it during our next episode. So there it is from all of us to all of you. Big hugs. Thanks for tuning in. Have a good evening.
Thank you all. Bye.